Using this, if you look at this over time, over different years, you can see how those zones will shift. If you look at the red being probably anything below the red being really bad, but the red zones in particular, the green or the blue being low, moderate, or high areas of Pierce's disease based on that paper, you can see this will shift over time. I'll just show you a few years in succession to see how this changes. So it's not anything that's stagnant. It is always changing as we go. And with that, we've seen a change over time. If you think about climate, it is a long-term thing. It's not like weather. But over the last 26 years, we have seen some shifts over what I first observed and what I observe now. If you look at this graph in the top, if you look at this red dotted line, that's the 5 days with temperatures below that critical temperature range that we talked about from Sutton's paper. And so anything that is above that in a year where you have more of those days, that is not good. When you have, or I'm sorry, when you have more, you have 5 or more days, that is good. When you have less, that's not good. And what you can see is the general trend line, if you look at this going across years, is down. That means that we have less and less of those cold days during the winter. And this is at about 500 meters in elevation, this particular site where this weather station is recording this data. If you look at the average winter low temperatures, we're also seeing similar type results. And again, if you're looking at, again, this is in Fahrenheit, but over time, we're seeing this shift in the low temperatures. They're generally higher. And that's what we've seen at that site, at that elevation. At that elevation, we used to say it was very safe to have vinifera grapes. We can no longer really say that now. Even at the 2,000 feet or about 600-meter elevation now, this is another weather station. Again, looking at similar data, here's your 5-day range here. And again, you want more of those days, not less. But what you can see is over time, we're getting less and less of those days on average. And we are starting to see Pierce's disease even developing at the 600-meter elevation. And the same thing applies with the winter low temperatures as well. They are going up. And so we do have a lot more of the bacteria. There's not that quote unquote curing that is occurring because of these low temperatures. So we're seeing a shift in what we have observed in the past. And so with that, this just gives you kind of an aerial shot of one of our vineyards. This one is about 1,700 feet or about 500 meters, somewhere in that range as far as the elevation. But we are now seeing a lot of Pierce's disease. So anywhere you see a missing vine or a missing block of vines, anywhere in here, this is all related to Pierce's disease. And so this is pretty devastating where we have these vineyards planted and we're seeing this shift in the winter temperatures and what's happening as a result of Pierce's disease, where we used to think we could be safe. But with that, we are seeing an interest in planting Pierce's disease resistant vines. There are quite a few of these vines that have come out of Andy Walker's breeding program in California. Shane will talk to you about one of these, the Caminere Noir, and then also another Pierce's disease resistant vine, which is Blanc de Bois. But that's kind of the future of, I think, grape growing here in the South, in particular in Georgia, because we're quickly, with warming winter temperatures, we're losing our ability to grow Vitis vinifera in this state. And I think that's kind of the reality of where we are. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Shane. He's going to talk to you about some of his works, particularly with some of these new cultivars, because if we're going to grow them, we also have to figure out what we can do with them as far as spray programs. And they're always totally different than what we've grown in the past. So he's going to mention some of the cultivars and what we're doing to look at those as well. With that, I'm going to turn it over to him.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Brannen. I get to talk about some of the research that I've been doing here at the University of Georgia, specifically just one portion of it where we went in with the research objective of determining whether we can develop lower input fungicide programs for these PD tolerant or resistant hybrids due to the native grape species in their background. With my trial, we looked at 5 different cultivars, Blanc de Bois and Caminari Noir. I'll talk about these two today briefly. We also had Crimson Cabernet, Lamanto, and another selection from the Andy Walker breeding program that was a part of that trial. Blanc de Bois is a white berried wine grape that's 50% Vitis vinifera. It's got various Vitis species within its background. It was bred by John A. Mortensen at the University of Florida's Institute of Food and Agricultural Sciences in 1968. It's been a bit of a standard in regards to looking at Pierce's disease resistance in some capacity. And Caminari Noir is the other one that I'm going to talk about today. It's a red berried wine grape that is 94% Vitis vinifera. That's 94% Vitis vinifera, 3% Vitis arizonica, and 3% Vitis rupestris. That is essentially a cross between, that results as like 50% Petit Syrah and 25% Cabernet Sauvignon. It got its resistance through breeding in the single dominant gene PDR1 from Vitis arizonica. To conduct this hybrid grape trial, looking at how well these 5 different cultivars will do in southeastern United States and Georgia's climate specifically, we did a randomized complete block design comparing 3 fungicide program treatment regimens, comparing those against an untreated check. We replicated each treatment 5 times, and we made sure that disease was prominent in the vineyard by using plots that consisted of 4 vines, and we treated the 2 center vines and left each vine on either side of the treatment untreated. Additionally, we left an entire row untreated between these as well. Other than that, cultural practices were kept standard for the southeastern United States. And we used these fungicide input regimens for that, what we're categorizing as low, moderate, and high. So across this, we have our fungicide treatment regimens. We've got our fungicides down on the left side of this table. Again, all of these were compared against an untreated check. And for 2021, our treatment dates are listed at the bottom. So for our low program, we put in some products like Captan and Manzate Pro Stick, and we're really just trying to control our basic rots with a little bit of activity on some other pathogens. But the main difference between our moderate and high moving from the low, the moderate has Prophyte, Ridamil Gold, and Zampro. So these are going to be bringing in some specifically downy mildew active products for that. And then the high treatment is bringing in Abound, Endura, and Rally. So we're going to get a lot more activity on powdery mildew and fruit rots as well. So using these 4 different treatment regimens, we're looking to look at, 1, what diseases are getting, or are they getting, and 2, can we utilize a lower or higher input fungicide regimen to manage these efficiently. Note that we do not have sulfur in on the low program, and that's because we wanted to separate out powdery mildew and see how that's coming in on these as well. And additionally, hybrids are known to be sensitive to powdery mildew, and we've done some tests on that since then as well. For that, we found that we get the cultivars get rots. We saw a rot complex. They got bitter rot, macrophoma rot, and black rot kind of as a rot, and I rated those as just fruit rots across the cultivars. And also we got foliar diseases. Downy mildew was prevalent, and powdery mildew. Powdery mildew for today, we're not going to talk a whole lot about it. Caminari Noir gets it, but we didn't see a lot of it during my trials for it. Additionally, Blanc de Bois, we did not see it at all on there, and it has some documented levels of resistance to powdery mildew. So for all of those diseases, we rated it for incidence and severity and compared that at each date and generated an area under the disease progress curve for that so that we could analyze that across time with that. That brings me to our first table that we're looking at area under the disease progress curve for downy mildew on leaves and fruit rot evaluated in the cultivar Blanc de Bois. So let me lay this out. We have our treatment regimens on the left side of our table, and then we have our different years at the top column going down with leaf downy mildew and fruit rot complex going across in that order for both years. So we didn't see much difference in leaf downy mildew for either year for Blanc de Bois. Statistically, numerically, we saw a reduction in that and a trending downward, but our real, for this trial, the real issue came with controlling our rots, and we're getting separation for the high treatment where we're getting the best quality fruit and the lowest and least disease in regards to incident and severity with our fruit rots going across years for that. Moving to Caminari Noir for 2020 and 2021. These are set up the same with our treatments going down the left side of the table in intensity and 2020 and 2021. I'll note that for downy mildew in 2020, the disease incidence and severity was low. And so these are only as a one rating thing, and it is as a percentage from 100. And for downy mildew, there was little differences between our treatments for 2020, but in 2021, we got some separation where our moderate and high performed the best. And that makes sense because we're adding some downy mildew specific materials into the moderate treatment. And then for the fruit rots for 2020 and 2021, it's really requiring the highest treatment where we're adding those additional products in it to get the best and highest level of control within within the Caminari Noir cultivar. So to conclude that out, all hybrids were susceptible to downy mildew and rots, though the degree varied. Blanc de Bois did not show powdery mildew, whereas the other hybrids did show some degree of powdery mildew susceptibility and would require additional powdery mildew active materials. So all spray programs, a full spray program is required for all these hybrids due to the rots. Unfortunately, very little cost savings could be realized in the Georgia environment, but these are good alternatives and are performing well. So at this point, I will transfer over to Dr. Sarah Lowder, the Extension Viticulture Specialist in the Department of Horticulture.
All right. A little bit of musical chairs. But thanks everyone for being here today. I just wanted to talk a little bit about this bacteriophage trunk injection treatment that can be used to help control for powdery mildew. This is a trunk injection treatment. So this was a product that was released a handful of years ago. It was registered in Georgia just before we started using this trial, but it is injected using this pressurized gun system. So you insert the gun against the trunk or the cordons, and then it injects the material that way. For the recommendations from the company is that you make either 2 to 3 applications of the bacteriophage per season, starting at bloom and then following 4 to 6 weeks later. So we did do this at the high pressure system. So we did this at 3 different times where the vines were either not treated or they were treated with the bacteriophage. This was done over 2 years. And so for the mature vines, they were injected 4 different times, twice on either side of the trunk, and then in both cordons, kind of at the base of the cordons. If they were fully mature or larger, fully established, I should say. If they were young, we did have a handful of younger vines that didn't have established cordons that we just injected twice according to the rules for that. This was done in a Vidal Blanc block. There was about 700 vines in these blocks on 3309 rootstock. The original planting on this was in 2001. And so that's what we would call our mature vines in this group. This was about 40% of the block at present. About 60% of those had been replanted in the last 6 years, with a handful of those being within the last 3 years. So there was a handful of the smaller unestablished vines with about 60% of the block being replanted in the last 6 years. Just everything that was either applied 4 times or twice for those young vines, I combined into one group because we really didn't see much of a difference between the two. For our disease rating, these were rated twice throughout the year, once during the 3rd injection, which was in early August, both years, and then following a final rating about 2 weeks after harvest, which was in mid-September for these. This was done by 2 different raters, and we used this scale where it was from 0 to 5, where 0 was no disease, 1 and 2 were very few leaves experiencing some symptoms, and then where there was more and more of the vine showing symptoms of this. For our 1 and 2 ratings, those were pretty much only seeing leaf scorch on those leaves and not any of the other potential symptoms for Pieris disease there. So to just kind of show some of the overall results, this is both years combined. I'm just kind of looking at the spread. We did see a significant difference in lower incidence and a lower severity in our treated vines versus the untreated. There still was pretty high incidence for that, but there was a significant difference between our treatments for sure. Just as a note, we did take a subsample of those vines and test them with the Amplify RP just to confirm that we did have some Xylella present in those samples. For the most part, they did agree with our samples, but there was enough disagreement with those 1 and 2 rated samples that we did kind of just combine them with the no disease. That could just be a sensitivity issue or potentially just some test issues. But for just everything going forward, I just kind of combine it either with the no disease or very, very few symptoms versus a much higher degree of symptoms present in those vines. So like a yes or no, whether those symptoms are present. For year 1, again, we did see a difference between our treated and untreated, where our treated vines were about 7% incidence and our untreated vines were about 12% incidence. We didn't necessarily see a statistical difference between our young and mature vines, but there was a higher incidence in the mature vines for that overall. Moving into year 2, that pattern did reverse. Well, we did see a difference between our young and mature vines for this, again, with a higher incidence overall. This was a drier year where our treated vines had about 14% incidence and our untreated vines had about 22% incidence on here. We had fewer of the mature vines showing symptoms this year. That is probably more driven that this is in the same field both years, and the grower did pull out a handful of the vines, not as many as I probably would have if this were my personal field, but they did pull out of some of the vines that were all pretty much mature vines for this. So we did see a difference that year where we saw a higher incidence in our younger vines for this. And another just quick pattern, this was again in the same field for both years. This is not statistically different, but I just wanted to show the trend in our vines that either didn't have any treatment at all or had one treatment one of the years versus the ones that were treated for both years. That we did see a trending towards those 2 treated vines having the lower incidence overall for that. So just kind of to talk about it, this is something that a lot of our growers had a lot of interest in, but we'll see. I don't know necessarily how feasible this treatment will necessarily be for a lot of our Georgia growers. It is a fairly expensive product. The trunk injections, while this is certainly simpler than a lot of other trunk injection methods that I have seen, It still was pretty intensive to be able to do these applications. Whether you can get the injectors, that's through a separate company than the folks that do the bacteriophage itself, and whether or not you can potentially get a good return on the investment there. The growers that we worked with for this specifically wanted to do it on the Vidal Blanc because they generally get a high enough yield on this block that they could potentially make up the money that they spent on this product. But overall, I think they were hoping a little bit more extreme results than what we got, albeit I was glad to see that we at least saw some difference between our treated and our untreated vines for that. And with that, that's kind of a quick and dirty of some of the stuff we've got going on in Georgia here. So if you've got questions for me or any of the other presenters that we have, we're all sitting here and we can answer your questions. But thank you all for being here today.
Thank you for the three of you. Excellent presentation. So now we open time for questions. You can raise your hand and talk or write it in the chat, whatever you feel like it. So question.